Education is preparation for reparations.
We continue with the UK Reparations Conference today, and we're going to start with a session on international reparations. But the first speaker that I'd like to bring up is an extremely important person, one of our official co-chairs of this conference, the first black woman elected to Parliament, the first black woman to do many things, but the list is too long and we need to run to time. and you will all know this woman very, very well. She is the Right Honourable Diane Abbot MP.
Okay, let's say it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
I didn't quite hear that. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a great pleasure to speak and to be the co-chair at this very important conference. And first of all, I want to give my congratulations to Barbara Addy, the member for Streatham, without whose energy and commitment this conference wouldn't have happened. This is a very important conference. As they say, the past is not over, it isn't even past. And it's so important to root our understanding and our campaigning in the present with an understanding of the past. I want to begin by talking about the amount of compensation which was given to slaveholders. Because you'll hear people say in the coming months and years, and they've said it before, why should we give all this money to the descendants of slaves? It's because you gave all that money to slave owners. So in 1833, the British government paid 20 million to compensate slaveholders, the equivalent of 17 billion in modern money. And, it isn't just that they compensated slaveholders. In fact, the slaves were not let free straight away. There was an apprenticeship system. Slaves had to work for 6 years after the so-called abolition. They had to work for 6 years at 45 hours a week with no pay. And the money went to some of the most famous names of the era. John Gladstone, the father of the distinguished British Prime Minister William Gladstone, got £80 million in compensation. And the ancestors of George Orwell, the writer Graham Greene, and no surprises, David Cameron, their ancestors all got compensation for being slaveholders. And perhaps even more interesting is all that money, as I say, 17 billion in modern money, was not paid off until 2015. So when people say to you, why should we be spending money on compensating the descendants of slaves, it's because you were paying money to slave holders right up until 2015. And the present-day consequences of slavery and colonialism are very complex and deep-rooted in history. And even the current war and suffering and violence in the Middle East can be traced back to the history of colonialism and the Balfour Declaration in 1974. But that's another conference for another time. For centuries, men and women and children of African descent have endured forced labour, exploitation, and human rights violation. And this historic trauma is not over. It has left deep and enduring scars on the social, economic, and political development of African and Caribbean nations, as well as all people of African descent in the Americas. So as we approach the bicentenary of the so-called scramble for Africa, one of the most shameful periods in history, we must reflect on the dark legacy of colonialism. European powers competed for plunder, conquest, colonies, and money. Slavery and slaveholding wasn't just an individual decision or activity, it was the foundation of the wealth of Western Europe and the Americas today. And that's another reason why we should be calling for reparations. But reparations is not just about compensating people for past wrongs. They are a collective responsibility to address these systemic injustices. And the wealth amassed and based in centuries of exploitation continues to cast a long shadow. Reparation is not about casting blame on the present generation, and reparations can take various forms. The first step, in my view, should be an apology from the British government. My colleague, the member for Streatham, actually stood up in Parliament and asked Rishi Sunak for an apology. You won't be surprised to hear he didn't give her an apology, but we will make him give us an apology. And this conference is an important part of that process. Now, one of the things we'll be debating and discussing at the conference today is what form reparations should actually take, and who and what should actually take charge of the reparations. Reparations can take various forms. It can take the forms of money, like the slaveholders got, but it can also take the form of repatriation of stolen artifacts, debt relief, infrastructure development, education and healthcare initiatives. And on the question of social artifacts, I'm sure some of you will have seen earlier this week the member for Streatham being escorted out of the British Museum for demanding stolen artifacts be returned to their rightful owners. And let us remember, because British museums have only recently started to make this clear, that these objects were stolen with no recompense from former colonies and former parts of the British Empire. Very slowly, these artifacts are being returned to the communities and the countries that made them, but it's very slow. And I was very struck. One of the Cambridge colleges, Balliol, who, as it happens, the master of Balliol College is a woman of colour, and she tried to get the objects in Balliol College which belong to Africa repatriated. They're stolen artifacts. They don't belong to Balliol College or the British. And would you believe that past and present students of Balliol took her to court and got the repatriation of these objects blocked? And, you know, why it's so important to have a conference like this is because we need to shed light and we need to stop this idea that any of these objects actually belong to the institution and to this country in the here and now. History is so important. So finally, I would like to emphasise that this conference takes place during Black History Month. It is very important to comprehend our past, regardless of our place of birth or our parents' origins. And as we engage in discussions today about achieving reparations, we are actively contributing to the remaking and the illuminating of history, and by addressing the historical injustices inflicted on people of African descent, we can collectively work towards a more equitable and just world in former colonies, in current colonies, in colonies which, although they are free in name, remain colonised in economically and in reality. So this conference is important. As I said at the beginning, the past isn't past, and we are here to increase our understanding and to campaign for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you so much for co-chairing this conference. It's extremely important to have your input today.
Education is preparation for reparations.